I was halfway through patching the roof when I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Out here, you can hear a car coming from a mile away, especially since my nearest neighbor lives 3 miles down the road. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked up just as a white SUV rolled to a stop in front of my cabin. The doors bore that all-too-familiar HOA logo I'd seen plastered around town, the same one that had tried to fine me for putting up a no trespassing sign on my own land. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like armor. Even from the porch, I could feel that thick air of authority she carried, like she thought the whole county owed her an explanation. Her first words weren't a greeting. They were an accusation. "Sir, you're in violation of multiple housing ordinances," she said, tapping her pen against the board. "This property is not registered as residential under the Lakeside HOA's jurisdiction." I couldn't help but smile. I'd been expecting this day ever since the HOA expanded their territory beyond the official boundary line, and now one of their enforcers had wandered right up to my door. "Is that so?" I asked, leaning on the railing. "You might want to double-check your jurisdiction lines, ma'am." She straightened, lips tightening. "I know exactly where the boundary ends." Her eyes flicked to the paper, but she didn't take it. She was used to people backing down. I wasn't one of them. And the best part? She had no idea who I was or what kind of authority I carried in this county. She didn't even flinch when I stepped off the porch, just flipped another page on that clipboard, like she was about to write me up for existing. The kind of person who lives for rules, even when she makes them up on the spot. Still, I played along. "Inspection, huh? Sure thing. You go ahead and take a look around." She gave me this suspicious side-eye, probably thinking she'd caught me hiding something. Then she started circling the cabin, jotting notes and mumbling to herself. Unregistered structure, unauthorized, well-lined, improper fencing. It was like watching a kid pretend to be a detective, except this one could actually cause trouble for people who didn't know better. When she reached the back of the property, she froze. The old inspection tags were still nailed to the water system, with my signature stamped in county ink. I could see the confusion flicker across her face as she read it. That exact moment, her confidence cracked. She came back around to the front, voice tighter this time. "This tag says county certified. That can't be right. These permits were suspended years ago." I crossed my arms. "You're right," I said calmly. "They were, until I reinstated them." Her eyebrows shot up. "You reinstated them?" I gave her a slow nod. "That's right, because I'm the one who signs off on inspections in this county. And you, ma'am, are trespassing on government property." For a split second, she just stood there, clipboard halfway between her chest and her chin, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. You could almost hear the gears turning behind that forced smile. Then she tried to recover. "You can't just say you're the county inspector," she stammered, tightening her grip on the clipboard. "That's impersonating an official. I could have you arrested." I almost wanted to laugh, but I kept my voice steady. "You're welcome to call the sheriff's office," I said, pulling my ID badge from my jacket. "Ask for Deputy Mills. He's my brother-in-law." Her eyes darted from the ID to my face and back again. Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in disbelief, the kind that borders on panic when someone realizes the situation just flipped upside down. Well, there's no need to get law enforcement involved," she said, her voice suddenly sugary sweet. "I was just making sure our neighborhood maintains standards. You know, for everyone's safety." "Safety," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. "You mean like the safety violations your crew left on the drainage project last month? The one still missing a runoff permit?" "That did it." Her posture faltered, and, for the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She lowered her voice. You You know about that? I tilted my head. Karen, I know everything that happens in this district. And right now, what's happening is you're trespassing, making unauthorized inspections, and interfering with county operations. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of her cruise pickup idling down the road. She looked over her shoulder, as if considering whether to bolt or argue. But before she could move, I added quietly, "You might want to head back and fix your own violations before I decide to file a report." Her face drained of color. "A report?" "Standard procedure," I said, turning toward the cabin door. "But don't worry, I'll make sure to note your enthusiasm for community standards." When I looked back, she was gone. Just a clipboard lying in the dust, fluttering in the breeze. By the time I got back inside, I could still see her white SUV speeding off down the gravel road, kicking up dust like she was trying to erase the fact she'd ever been here. I shut the door, exhaled, and finally allowed myself a grin. For months, neighbors had warned me about her Karen, the self-appointed HOA queen they called her. She'd been harassing folks for mailbox colors, flower beds, even one poor guy's Christmas lights that he forgot to take down by January. Nobody had ever stood up to her, mostly because she bullied them with fake citations and legal threats. But now that she knew who I was, I had a feeling that was about to change. The next morning, I found a note pinned to my gate. Neatly folded, typed, with her name printed in bold at the bottom. It read, "Dear Mr. Lane, after reviewing recent information, I realized there may have been a misunderstanding regarding your property status. Please disregard any prior communication. Welcome to Lakeside Estates. Sincerely, Karen." A misunderstanding. That's how she phrased trespassing, intimidation, and attempted property seizure. Still, I didn't reply. I just walked back up to the cabin and poured myself a cup of coffee, watching the morning fog roll off the lake. Sometimes, silence is the best message. Later that week, I got a call from the sheriff's office. Deputy Mills was laughing before he even said hello. "Hey, you wouldn't happen to know why Karen just came down here asking how to reverse an HOA violation report, would you?" I chuckled. Maybe she finally realized the county's not her playground. He laughed harder. "She's been real polite lately. Keeps saying how much she respects the inspector's office." "You sure you didn't scare her too much?" I smiled into my coffee. Just enough to remind her what real authority looks like. When I walked in, Karen was there. Sitting behind the front desk this time, dressed to the nines, pretending to type something important. The second she saw me, her hands froze over the keyboard. "Mr. Lane," she said carefully, her voice the picture of forced politeness. "How nice to see you again." "Nice to see you too," I said, stepping closer. "Thought I'd drop by to make sure your office is up to code." New environmental compliance standards just went into effect this quarter. Her smile faltered. "Of course. Everything's perfectly compliant." I let the silence hang just long enough for her to start fidgeting. Then I took a slow look around. The office was spotless, except for one detail. The electrical inspection tag by the breaker panel was 6 months expired. I raised an eyebrow. "You wouldn't happen to have a renewal form for this tag, would you?" Karen blinked, then scrambled through a drawer. It's in progress," she muttered. "We've been meaning to schedule that." I said, pulling out my notepad. "Meaning to. Well, I'll note that as pending compliance. You'll want to handle that before the county reinspection." She swallowed hard, her earlier arrogance gone. "Of course. Right away." As I turned to leave, she finally spoke up, voice softer this time. "Mr. Lane, look, I didn't know who you were before. I thought you were just another rule breaker trying to take advantage of the neighborhood." I paused at the door. "Karen, sometimes the rules aren't the problem," I said, meeting her eyes. "It's the people who twist them to feel powerful." She didn't answer, just stared down at her clipboard, the same one she'd used to try and push me out. Only now, it looked a whole lot heavier in her hands. When I stepped outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. For the first time, the neighborhood felt quiet, peaceful even. Maybe Karen had finally learned something. Or maybe she'd just realized that real authority doesn't need to shout to be heard. Word spread faster than wildfire in Lakeside Estates. By the weekend, every homeowner on the block knew about what happened, the so-called inspection gone wrong. And for once, the whispers weren't about who broke an HOA rule. They were about Karen. I started noticing little changes around the neighborhood. The old man down on Cedar Ridge, the one she'd fined for his improperly sized flagpole, he was flying his flag higher than ever. The retired school teacher she'd bullied about her mailbox color, bright yellow now like a beacon of quiet rebellion. And nobody, not one person, had heard a single word from Karen since that day in the office. Then, one morning, while I was checking the cabin's septic report, there was a knock at my door. It was Tom, the neighbor who'd built the wooden duck feeders along the shoreline, one of Karen's favorite targets. "Hey, Inspector," he said, grinning as he handed me a mug of coffee. "You really shook things up around here." Karen called an emergency HOA meeting yesterday, said she's reevaluating leadership structure. I couldn't help but laugh. Re-evaluating, huh? That's HOA talk for surrender. Tom smirked. Yeah, well, she's been real quiet since you showed that badge. Some of us are thinking about forming a new committee, one that actually helps the community instead of policing it. I nodded, sipping the coffee. Now that's a good idea. Start small. Keep it fair. Make sure the rules serve the people, not the other way around. He smiled. You'd make a good leader, you know. Folks listen when you talk. I shook my head. Nah, I've got enough on my plate with the county. But I'll tell you what, I'll help you get it started. That's when I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about standing up to Karen anymore. It was about reminding everyone in Lakeside Estates that power only works when people let fear keep them quiet. And now, they weren't quiet anymore. As Tom walked back toward his house, I looked out across the lake, calm, golden, and still. For the first time in a long while, this place actually felt like a community, not a kingdom ruled by a clipboard. Sometimes it only takes one confrontation to wake an entire neighborhood. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, official HOA stationery, gold emblem, sealed tight like it held state secrets. I already knew who it was from. Inside was a formal notice. Effective immediately, I, Karen Whitmore, hereby resign from my position as HOA President of Lakeside Estates. I will continue to serve as a resident and community member. Thank you for your understanding. No apology. No explanation. Just a surrender written in bureaucratic language, the kind she used to bury people in. I stared at the letter for a while, then folded it neatly and set it aside. The battle was over, but not in the way she thought. She'd lost control, yes, but more importantly, the neighborhood had found its voice. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the community center. A small crowd had gathered. Tom, Mrs. Jacobs from the yellow mailbox, a couple of young families, even the landscapers she'd once berated in the street. They were talking, laughing, planning their first neighborhood cookout. No forms to fill out. No permits required. When I walked in, everyone went quiet for a moment. Then Tom raised his coffee mug and said, to the man who finally stood up to her, I shook my head. Nah, this isn't about me. It's about you all finally realizing she never owned this place you did. Mrs. Jacobs chuckled. Still, you gave her the wake-up call she needed. I smiled. Maybe? Or maybe she just needed someone to show her that titles don't make you powerful, people do. As the crowd laughed and started chatting again, I stepped outside for some air. The sun was dipping low, painting the lake in amber light. From across the street, I saw Karen standing by her SUV watching quietly. No clipboard, no entourage, just her alone for once. For a long moment, our eyes met. She didn't sneer, didn't bark orders, just gave a small nod, a silent truce, maybe even a hint of respect. I nodded back, then turned toward the sound of laughter echoing from the community center. The fight was done. The rules had changed. And for the first time, so had Karen. In the days that followed, I focused on repairing the damage she'd tried to inflict. The trench had been filled, the slope reinforced, and the soil treated to prevent further erosion. I brought in a team of experts, structural engineers, hydrologists, and landscape architects to ensure that every inch of the property was safe. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about reclaiming the pride and peace that had been threatened. Every beam I inspected, every wall I measured, reminded me why I'd built this home with my own hands. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control again. Neighbors stopped by frequently, curious about the repairs and the story that had gone viral online. I shared what I could, but kept the focus on the lessons learned, vigilance, community awareness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Tom and Mrs. Jacobs even offered to help with minor landscaping and maintenance tasks. It was strange, yet heartwarming, to see the neighborhood rally around a single property, turning what had been a battle into a small movement of solidarity. Meanwhile, Karen remained quiet. No more letters, no more threats, no more public statements. The HOA board scrambled to recover its credibility, but it was too late. The narrative had shifted. People had seen the truth. I often stood on my porch in the evenings, overlooking the lake. The water glimmered as it always had, and the gentle breeze carried a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing firm, and of the power one person has when they refuse to be intimidated. By the time autumn arrived, the property had not only been restored, but improved. The foundation reinforced, the drainage optimized, and the landscaping carefully planned to prevent future disputes. And while the battle with Karen and her HOA had been exhausting, it had reminded me of something invaluable. No one, not even someone armed with a clipboard and a sense of entitlement, could take away what I had built with skill, patience, and integrity. The neighborhood had awakened. The HOA had faltered, and my home, my sanctuary, had emerged stronger than ever. News of Karen's resignation and the viral video didn't just stay in lakeside estates. Word spread through neighboring communities, county offices, and even online forums dedicated to HOA conflicts. People reached out to me, some asking for advice, others simply sharing stories of their own battles with overbearing HOA leaders. Even beyond the borders of our lake, the story inspired action. Neighboring HOAs began reviewing their own regulations and enforcement practices, many choosing transparency and fairness over fear-based control. I received letters and emails thanking me for shining a light on the issue, proof that one person, acting decisively, could influence more than just their own backyard. Occasionally, I'd catch sight of Karen driving through the area, always keeping her distance. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in seeing someone humbled. The lesson was enough. Her departure had opened a door for others to take responsibility and redefine what leadership meant in our neighborhood. Karen had completely vanished from the HOA spotlight. New leadership had taken over, promising transparency and fairness. No more secret projects, no more threatening letters. The neighborhood had reclaimed its voice, and I'd watched as the community transformed from one ruled by fear to one guided by cooperation and respect. Sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, I reflected on the ordeal. It had been exhausting, infuriating, and sometimes terrifying. But it had also reminded me of something essential. Boundaries matter, And standing firm in the face of intimidation isn't just about property, it's about dignity, justice, and principle. I thought about the videos, the viral posts, the media coverage. The attention had helped, yes, but it was the careful documentation, the methodical gathering of evidence, and the refusal to be bullied that made the difference. Power alone isn't enough. You need clarity, preparation, and courage. Neighbors waved as they passed by, and I waved back, feeling a sense of connection that had been missing for years. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It was part of a larger story, a symbol of what can happen when ordinary people refuse to be silenced by overreach and entitlement. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the lake turned gold, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The battle was over, the home secured, and the neighborhood stronger than ever. Karen had underestimated one thing: when you fight for what's right, the ripple effect can be far greater than anyone imagined. And for once, the lake wasn't just a view from my porch. It was proof that standing up for yourself, with patience and precision, can change an entire community. Even after the dust settled, the story of what had happened at Lake Elwood continued to echo through the community. New residents moved in, asking about the infamous HOA saga, and longtime neighbors shared the tale over fences and front porches. My home had become more than just a house. It was now a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority. The neighborhood itself had shifted. Informal committees monitored community projects, making sure rules were applied fairly and transparently. No longer was there fear that one person could wield a clipboard and a set of bylaws as a weapon. People realized that knowledge, preparedness, and unity were far more powerful than intimidation. Even Kareen's departure served a purpose. Her overreach had unintentionally taught the residents something valuable. Power is only effective when tempered with accountability. The lesson lingered in every discussion, every vote, and every decision the HOA made from that point on. For me, personally, the experience left a deeper impression than the repairs or the media attention ever could. It reinforced the importance of vigilance, the value of methodical action, and the necessity of standing firm in the face of threats, no matter how small or bureaucratic they seem. Sometimes I walk along the lakeshore at sunset, watching neighbors fish, kayak, or simply enjoy the water, and I can't help but feel proud not just of my home, but of the community we collectively defended. This was the legacy we'd built, one where courage, clarity, and principle mattered more than fear or intimidation. And while Karen would fade into memory, the lessons endured. Lake Elwood remained a haven, not just for me, but for everyone who called it home, a quiet reminder that one person, armed with the right knowledge and resolve, can spark change that lasts far beyond their own backyard. Spring arrived at Lake Elwood, and with it came a sense of renewal, not just in nature, but in the community itself. The grass on my property had recovered fully, the foundation was solid, and the slope that had once been a threat now looked pristine, reinforced with natural barriers and proper drainage. The lake sparkled, reflecting the blue sky and the promise of calm days ahead. The HOA had undergone a complete transformation. Leadership meetings were now open to all residents, with minutes published and decisions made transparently. The fear and intimidation that Karen had wielded like a weapon were replaced by dialogue, collaboration, and accountability. New policies focused on safety, environmental responsibility, and fairness, the kind of regulations that actually served the community, rather than empowered one overbearing individual. Neighbors greeted each other with a renewed sense of camaraderie. Children played near the shoreline without worry. Families hosted barbecues and small gatherings, and even the ducks seemed to swim more peacefully in the calm water. There was a shared pride in knowing that the neighborhood had collectively reclaimed its home, its voice, and its dignity. As for me, I continued to care for the house I had built, walking the grounds with satisfaction and a quiet sense of victory. I knew that standing firm had done more than protect property, it had inspired a shift in culture. The lake, once a silent witness to the HOA's overreach, now reflected a community strengthened by resilience and unity. And sometimes, when the sun sets and the sky turns gold over the water, I think about the lesson learned. Real authority is earned through respect, fairness, and action grounded in principle. Power wielded without accountability is fragile, and one person willing to stand for what is right can spark a change that echoes far beyond their own front porch. Lake Elwood had entered a new era, one defined by balance, justice, and community spirit. And I, along with my neighbors, would ensure it stayed that way. Even months after Karen's departure, the impact of the ordeal continued to manifest in unexpected ways. The viral video we had posted wasn't just a fleeting sensation. It became a reference point for communities dealing with overreaching HOAs across the county. Emails and messages arrived daily, some from people who had faced similar situations, others from journalists seeking to understand how one man had successfully defended his property and dignity. I took careful notes of each inquiry, realizing that the story could serve as a blueprint for others. Document everything, act methodically, and never underestimate the power of clear evidence combined with persistence. The footage, soil reports, expert testimonies, and time-stamped photographs had been my armor, and they had worked flawlessly. Locally, the ripple effect was tangible. Residents in neighboring developments began holding informal workshops on property rights, environmental regulations, and dispute resolution. I was invited to speak at a few gatherings, but I focused less on myself and more on the principles behind the fight. Knowledge, preparation, and courage, these were the tools I emphasized. Inside my home, life gradually returned to normal, but with a sense of heightened vigilance. The repairs were complete, the trench filled and reinforced, and the structural assessments cleared every corner of doubt. My house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a fortress, yes, but one that welcomed family, friends, and community. As I walked the perimeter of the property one evening, I paused at the shoreline, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the lake. It hit me that victory wasn't just in reclaiming the land or neutralizing Karen's threats. Victory was in persistence, the unwavering refusal to let intimidation define the outcome. And that persistence, visible in every repaired beam, every documented email, and every supportive neighbor, would serve as proof for years to come that when faced with unjust power, methodical action and steadfast courage aren't just options, they're necessities. Lake Elwood remained peaceful. The house stood proud, and the community had learned a lesson that no newsletter, no bylaw, and no overzealous president could ever erase. By the time summer rolled in, the transformation of Lakeside Estates was unmistakable. The neighborhood no longer felt like a collection of individual properties, policed by fear. It had become a connected, empowered community. Residents now collaborated on maintenance, safety, and environmental projects, and decisions were made with transparency and mutual respect. Occasionally, I'd glance at the water reflecting the sunset, thinking about Karen and her clipboard. She had underestimated what a single person, armed with knowledge and persistence, could accomplish. And though she had tried to impose control, she had inadvertently sparked a legacy of awareness, courage, and collaboration. Lakeside Estates was no longer just a place to live. It was a living example of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be silenced, when they document, prepare, and act with clarity and principle. And that legacy, I realized, would last far longer than any HOA newsletter ever could. The lake was calm, the homes were secure, and the community thrived, a lasting reminder that standing up for what's right doesn't just protect property, it protects the very spirit of the neighborhood. Months had passed since the last shovelful of dirt had been removed, and Karen had disappeared from the neighborhood. Life at Lake Elwood had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind of peace that comes not from avoiding conflict, but from confronting it and emerging stronger. I often found myself reflecting on the entire ordeal. Karen had wielded authority without accountability, assuming that fear and bureaucracy would bend reality to her will. She underestimated one thing: principle backed by preparation. Every camera, every soil test, every legal consultation had been a building block, not just for my defense, but for the truth. Standing on the porch at sunrise, sipping my morning coffee, I realized the lessons extended beyond property rights. They were lessons in courage, patience, and strategy, lessons that could apply to any conflict anywhere. When you document meticulously, act methodically, and refuse to be intimidated, you shift the balance of power. The clipboard, the newsletter, the carefully chosen words, all of it is meaningless against clarity and resolve. Neighbors continued to approach me, not out of expectation, but to share gratitude and seek advice. And each time, I reminded them of the most important principle: standing up isn't about ego, it's about protecting what is right, fair, and just. The community had changed. Fear no longer dictated decisions. The HOA, now under new, accountable leadership, focused on cooperation and safety. The homes around the lake thrived not because of rules enforced from above, but because people had learned the power of collective awareness. As the sunlight danced on the water, I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction. Karen's attempt to intimidate had failed, but the true victory lay not in her absence, it lay in the empowered community that had emerged in her wake. Lake Elwood wasn't just a home. It was a testament to persistence, a reminder that principle and preparation are stronger than any title, and proof that one person willing to stand firm can change the course of an entire neighborhood. By the time fall arrived, the saga of Lake Elwood had fully cemented itself in neighborhood history. The story of Karen, her failed attempts to intimidate, and the community's eventual triumph was told and retold, a cautionary tale and a source of pride. But beyond the headlines and viral videos, there was a deeper lesson that lingered for anyone who took the time to see it. Standing on my porch, one crisp morning, I watched families unload kayaks and fishing gear, children laughing as they skipped stones across the lake, and neighbors chatting as they worked together to maintain the shared paths and gardens. The area was vibrant, alive with a sense of mutual respect and awareness. What I realized most clearly was this: true power does not come from titles, threats, or bureaucratic edicts. True power comes from knowledge, preparation, and the courage to act when it matters most. Karen had tried to manipulate the system, assuming that her position alone could dictate outcomes. She failed because she lacked the one thing that matters in any conflict: accountability. The property, now fully restored, stood as a monument to persistence. The foundation was solid, the drainage systems perfect, and every inch of the land reflected careful planning and protection. But more importantly, the neighborhood had learned to stand together, informed and vigilant. The collective empowerment of residents became a protective force far stronger than any single president or board. I often thought back to the first day Karen showed up, clipboard in hand, claiming authority she didn't have. The fear I initially felt had been transformed into strategy, action, and finally, confidence. And that transformation from vulnerability to empowerment was the ultimate victory. As the sun set behind the trees, casting golden reflections across the lake, I knew this truth: a single person who stands for what is right, armed with knowledge and resolve, can not only defend their home, but inspire a community. Lake Elwood had been tested, and it had emerged stronger, more united, and wiser than ever. The story wasn't just mine. It belonged to the neighbors, to the families, and to anyone who would one day face overreach and intimidation. And that legacy, the legacy of persistence, principle, and community, would endure long after the waters had calmed, long after the headlines faded, and long after Karen had become a footnote in a story of triumph.